soldiers crowded aboard to go home. The river drifted quietly at night. Fire waited inside the boilers. The Mississippi River stretched wide under a golden April dawn. Its calm surface shone like liquid glass beneath soft, drifting mist. Birds called across the distance, faint and bright in the still air. The water moved slow, steady, carrying the promise of peace. The war had ended. 4 bitter years were over. Men once trapped in battle now carried hope in weary hearts. They dreamed of farms, porches, and children they had not seen. At the Memphis dock, the steamboat Sultana waited in sunlight. Her tall stacks rose against the pale blue morning sky. Black coal smoke curled upward in lazy ribbons that twisted apart. The crew loaded freight, barrels and crates under the captain's watch. Crowds of Union soldiers filled the landing, laughing and shouting. They wore faded uniforms and carried small bundles tied with rope. Some leaned on crutches or walked with slow, uneven steps. All carried one wish: to reach home again. Vendors shouted, selling hot coffee, pies, and sweet tobacco. Children darted through the crowd with flags and paper ribbons. A brass band played softly, the melody bright but tired. The smell of sugar, smoke, and river wind hung in the air. The captain paced the upper deck, calm but uneasy. He knew the load was far beyond safe limits, yet the schedule was tight and the pay was high. He looked upriver and gave a quiet nod to proceed. Below deck, firemen worked in the red glow of the furnace. They shoveled coal until sweat rolled down their faces. The iron plates groaned and clicked with growing heat. Steam hissed from the pipes in short breaths of pressure. Above, sunlight flashed across uniforms and faces turned toward home. Men leaned on the rails and watched the river widen. Someone began a low song about mothers and open fields. Voices joined, soft and slow, carrying across the water. The whistle blew long and deep, shaking the morning stillness. Lines fell away as the Sultana drifted from the dock. Paddle wheels churned, leaving white foam in a widening trail. Cheers rose behind her as she turned north toward open water. The Mississippi shimmered endless and bright beneath her hull. Everything felt peaceful, perfect, and safe in that golden light. But deep below, the fire whispered into steel and silence. The river kept its secret, waiting for night to come. Morning sunlight spread across the wide deck of the Sultana. The boat glided north with a low hum from her engines. Steam curled upward in white streams that faded into the sky. The air smelled of river water, coal smoke, and sweet bread. Men sat shoulder to shoulder along the railings. They shared stories, laughter, and small pieces of bread or fruit. Some carved initials into the wooden deck with pocket knives. Others wrote letters they hoped to mail once they reached home. Their words were simple, full of longing and memory. A few described farms with new crops already in the ground. Others spoke of children who barely remembered their fathers' faces. Voices overlapped like ripples moving outward from the hull. The ship carried too many people, but no one complained. Every inch of space was filled with uniforms, blankets, and chatter. Someone played a harmonica near the stairs. The tune was slow, proud, and filled with quiet joy. The narrator's tone softens. He describes the river's rhythm, steady and ancient beneath them. The Mississippi has carried soldiers, merchants, and wanderers for centuries. It flows as witness to peace and tragedy alike. A young soldier stood near the bow, squinting into the sunlight. He whispered a name, one that no one else could hear. In his pocket rested a photograph of a girl by a fence. He smiled, then tucked it away as the wind grew cool. Down below, cooks stirred heavy pots over iron stoves. The smell of coffee mixed with the bitter scent of coal. Firemen wiped their faces and listened to the rumble of pressure. Everything seemed under control, routine, and perfectly ordinary. Children of Memphis waved from the shore as the Sultana passed. Men waved back, some tossing coins into the water. The paddle wheels turned smooth, lifting spray into glittering arcs. The boat's flag snapped sharply against the breeze. Above it all, the captain stood at the wheelhouse window. He saw the crowded decks and forced a calm smile. Profit and pride kept the worry hidden behind his eyes. He told himself the boilers would hold a little longer. Evening shadows stretched over the riverbanks as daylight softened. Lanterns flickered across the decks, glowing warm against the dusk. Men talked of train rides, wives, and quiet suppers by the fire. They did not see how fragile the moment truly was. Steam hissed through the pipes deep inside the Sultana. The sound was steady, soft, almost harmless to the ear, but the pressure behind it had begun to climb too fast. Metal plates shivered where bolts held the boilers together. An engineer wiped sweat from his brow and checked the gauges. The needles trembled near the red marks. He frowned, then looked toward the engine room door. Voices above covered the sound of strain and heat. The captain was busy greeting passengers on the upper deck. He did not hear the quiet hammer of trouble below. Someone had reported a leak in one of the boilers that morning. The repair was quick. A patch hammered over the weakened seam. The man who fixed it warned that it would not hold long. He spoke softly, not wanting to alarm the officers or crew. The captain nodded once, his eyes drifting to the crowded deck. They could not stop now, not with so many waiting to go home. Coal dust floated in the air like black snow. Firemen shoveled faster, their faces glowing red in the light. The heat was heavy, pressing against their skin and lungs. They coughed but kept working. The schedule mattered more than comfort. Above them, the passengers laughed and traded food and stories. They had no idea that danger breathed just below their feet. The deck creaked softly as the boat pushed north against the current. Sunlight flashed on the water, calm and deceitful. The narrator slows his voice. He tells of how small choices can build toward disaster. Every ship on the Mississippi carried risk, but greed magnified it. Too much pressure, too much weight, too little care. A mechanic stepped closer to the boiler and placed his ear to the steel. He heard a dull throb, like the heartbeat of something alive. He opened a valve slightly to ease the strain. Steam hissed out, curling around him like pale, ghostly breath. He waited, listening for change, but the rhythm stayed uneven. A pulse of power ran through the iron like muffled thunder. He glanced at the gauges again and whispered a prayer. The sound of shovels striking coal echoed like distant drums. He straightened, eyes stinging, and whispered to himself. "It will hold," he said. "It has to hold until Memphis." His voice vanished beneath the roar of the furnace. The Sultana kept moving, bright and beautiful, above the hidden fire. Night settled gently over the Mississippi River. The Sultana glided through the dark water, her decks glowing with lamplight. Stars shimmered above like tiny reflections of the waves below. The air was soft, cool and heavy with spring moisture. Most of the soldiers slept close together under thin blankets. The heat from the engines drifted up through the wooden floors. Men turned in their sleep, murmuring names, prayers, and half-forgotten songs. They dreamed of home, unaware of how close they were to danger. On the upper deck, a few men stayed awake and smoked. They watched the moon rise above the trees on the western bank. Its pale light traced a silver path across the river's surface. A breeze carried faint voices, laughter, and the rustle of rope. The engines thumped with steady rhythm deep within the ship. To tired ears, the sound was comfort, a heartbeat of safety. Only the engineers knew how uneven the pulse had become. They adjusted valves, careful and quiet, hiding their unease. The captain walked the deck, his face pale in the lantern light. He paused to look at the crowded rows of sleeping men. He thought about the weight pressing down on the hull. But the water was calm, the river kind, and he turned away. Far off in the dark, a bell rang from another steamboat. Its echo rolled across the open current, low and distant. The Sultana answered with her whistle, long and proud. Steam curled into the stars before fading into the night. In the galley, a cook cleaned pans and hummed to himself. The glow of the furnace painted the walls in flickering gold. He paused for a moment, feeling warmth and strange quiet. Outside, the night wind whispered against the thin iron plates. The narrator slows his tone to near silence. He speaks of peace before tragedy, of beauty before fear. Moments like this never seem dangerous until they are gone. The quiet is both gift and warning. The river was smooth, silver, and endless. The Sultana moved through it like a dream returning home. Every lamp burned steady. Every man believed he was safe. No one knew the heat below was reaching its breaking point. It was close to midnight when the air changed. The Mississippi River lay black and still beneath a heavy sky. A faint mist clung to the water, glowing faintly in the lamplight. The Sultana drifted forward, her engines beating in slow rhythm. Inside the boiler room, fire roared behind thick iron doors. Coal sparks jumped from the shovels and vanished into smoke. The air was thick, choking, filled with heat and dust. Every breath burned. Every sound echoed like thunder in the narrow space. A mechanic checked the gauges again, then again, his brow wet with sweat. The needles trembled far past the safe line. He reached for the valve, hesitating for only a second. Then came the sound, a deep groan from the heart of the ship. The explosion tore through the night like the roar of a cannon. 3 boilers burst at once, hurling fire, steam, and iron across the deck. The blast split the Sultana in half. Wood shattered, lamps burst, and men were thrown into the air. In an instant, peace turned to chaos. Flames rolled upward, devouring the cabins and canvas roofs. Scalding water poured over the sleeping soldiers. Screams filled the dark sky and echoed across the river. Fire spread faster than breath. Some men, still half asleep, stumbled through smoke searching for escape. Others leapt overboard without thinking, drawn toward the cold, black water. The deck tilted as the hull gave way. Timbers cracked like gunfire. A wall of steam swept across the survivors, searing skin and cloth. Coal and splinters rained down like burning snow. One soldier caught a beam and pulled himself toward the rail. Another crawled through the smoke, dragging a friend with burned hands. Their boots slipped on wet planks, slick with oil and blood. The air was filled with the roar of fire and human cries. Above it all, the river reflected the light of the flames. It looked like a path of molten glass stretching to the horizon. Men jumped from that light into the darkness below. Some vanished instantly, some surfaced, shouting for help. The Sultana's paddle wheels stopped turning. Her flag burned away, falling like a red star into the current. The captain staggered toward the bridge, shouting orders no one could hear. Heat drove him back as the ship's top deck collapsed in sparks. Far downriver, people in small towns woke to a single echoing blast. They ran to the shore and saw the glow on the horizon. The night was alive with orange fire and drifting ash. The Mississippi carried both flame and silence together in its flow. The narrator slows again. He speaks with sorrow, not shock. He tells how in one moment the proud ship became a funeral pyre. The Sultana burned bright enough to turn night into day. And then, within an hour, she began to sink. Her great timbers fell inward. Her lights vanished beneath the smoke. The river swallowed her whole. Above the wreck, the sky was empty again. Only the echo of screams remained. The Mississippi flowed on, calm and unbothered, as if nothing had happened. The current carried embers and broken dreams north toward the dawn. The fire still burned behind them as the Sultana began to break apart. The sound of crackling timber mixed with the endless rush of the river. Men screamed for help, their voices swallowed by steam and smoke. The night was no longer dark. It glowed red with terror. Hundreds were thrown into the cold water, gasping for air. Some clung to floating planks, others to one another. Their hands shook from pain and shock, skin blistered and raw. The Mississippi felt like ice against their burned flesh. A soldier surfaced, coughing, calling the name of his brother. No answer came, only the hiss of burning debris. Nearby, a man drifted face down, his uniform still smoldering. The survivor turned away, his breath ragged, his mind refusing to see. Steam hung low over the surface, turning the air into fog. Through it, faint shapes moved, arms, faces, broken beams of wood. One man floated by, clutching a photograph in one hand. The picture melted in the water, fading like memory itself. The narrator slows his tone to near silence. He describes the human will that refuses to surrender. Somewhere in the chaos, courage flickered like a weak but steady flame. Men who could barely move still tried to save others. A private found a door drifting among the wreckage. He pulled 2 men onto it before climbing himself. The weight nearly sank them, but the door stayed afloat. They shivered together, praying for dawn. Elsewhere, a fireman swam toward a crate of apples from the galley. He threw them to men around him, one by one, as if saving lives. Each fruit bobbed like a small miracle in the burning current. He smiled once before the current took him away. The river carried bodies and survivors side by side. Some sang hymns between waves, their voices trembling. Others simply floated, whispering, "Home, home," over and over. The sound was both prayer and farewell. Hours passed. The fire grew smaller as the current pulled it apart. The stars dimmed behind the smoke. The night felt endless. But on the eastern bank, lights began to flicker faintly in the distance. Boats from Memphis were coming. The survivors turned toward that glow, pushing with numb arms. Hope returned slowly, fragile but alive. One man whispered, "We made it," though the shore was still far away. Another looked back once at the burning wreck behind him. The Sultana was almost gone now, swallowed by smoke and water. The river was quiet, except for the cries that would not fade. Each survivor floated through the silence, half alive, half dreaming. The Mississippi kept them in its cold embrace until dawn. Dawn broke over the Mississippi like a soft gray veil. The river still smoked from the wreck, its surface scattered with debris. Broken planks, barrels, and bodies drifted in slow circles. The air smelled of ash, oil, and the faint sweetness of burned wood. From the eastern shore, fishermen saw the glow long before sunrise. They rowed toward the sound of cries, their lanterns flickering on the water. Each man pulled hard against the current, hearts pounding with dread. They did not know what they would find, only that someone needed saving. The first boats reached the survivors, clinging to wreckage. Hands reached out, trembling, pulling men from the freezing current. Some were half-conscious, their lips blue, their eyes unfocused. Others begged for news of brothers, friends, or anyone still alive. A farmer from Memphis leaned over his skiff and grabbed a soldier's wrist. He lifted him gently, wrapping a coat around the man's shoulders. The soldier tried to speak, but only coughed out smoke and water. The farmer said, "You're safe now. Hold on." The narrator slows, his voice soft and full of care. He tells how kindness rises even in the darkest hours. Ordinary men and women risked their lives to save strangers. In that gray morning, compassion became the only light left. On the riverbank, families gathered with blankets and food. They built fires that crackled in the damp morning air. Survivors huddled close, trembling under borrowed coats and quilts. Nurses moved among them, whispering words of comfort and prayer. A woman knelt beside a young boy with burned hands. She wiped his face with river water and covered him with her shawl. The boy whispered, "My mother's waiting in Ohio." The woman smiled sadly. "Then you will see her again." More boats arrived, bringing the wounded from the wreck. Some could walk, others had to be carried on makeshift stretchers. Doctors worked by firelight, tearing cloth into bandages. The cries of pain mixed with the quiet rhythm of prayer. By noon, the fires on the river had faded to smoke. Only charred pieces of the Sultana remained, drifting like ghosts. Yet the banks were alive with movement and mercy. Every act of help became a victory against despair. As evening fell, the survivors stared into the calm current. They saw the same river that had nearly taken their lives. It moved slowly, endlessly, carrying away the ashes of the dead. But along its edge, human hands had turned tragedy into grace. By the time the sun rose high, the fires had faded. The Mississippi lay quiet, covered in drifting smoke and floating wreckage. Charred beams turned slowly in the current like blackened bones. The smell of burned wood and oil lingered long after the flames were gone. Along the muddy banks near Memphis, the survivors lay wrapped in blankets. Doctors moved from one to another, checking for signs of life. Some spoke softly, others could not speak at all. Their eyes stared blankly at the river that had betrayed them. There were too many wounded for the small hospitals to hold. Churches opened their doors, turning pews into beds. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, sweat, and prayer. Women washed faces with cool water, whispering gentle words. Children helped carry bandages and poured coffee for the doctors. Everyone worked until their hands shook with exhaustion. A soldier awoke and asked, "Where is my brother?" No one answered. A nurse touched his hand and told him to rest. He closed his eyes, the question still on his lips. Outside, wagons lined the roads with the bodies of the dead. The town bells rang slowly through the humid air. Lists of survivors and missing men were nailed to the courthouse wall. Crowds gathered, silent, scanning names with trembling fingers. Some found the names they prayed for. Others did not. The cries of those left waiting were louder than the church bells. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Newspapers called it the greatest maritime disaster in American history, but few people far from Memphis ever read the reports. The country was too busy rebuilding from war. The Sultana became only a headline, then a whisper. That night, as the last fires dimmed, the survivors could not sleep. They heard the water moving outside, steady and endless. The same river that had killed now sounded calm again. Its surface reflected the moon, as if nothing had happened. Weeks passed, and the river returned to its quiet rhythm. The wreck of the Sultana sank beneath the surface, buried in silt and memory. The current erased the scorch marks along the bank. Grass began to grow again where bodies once lay. In Memphis, people spoke of the disaster in hushed tones. For a few days, the story filled every newspaper in town. But soon the headlines faded, replaced by talk of rebuilding and politics. The nation was healing from war, too busy to remember another tragedy. The narrator's tone is low and distant. He tells how even great loss can be swallowed by time. More than 1,000 lives were gone, yet history turned the page. No grand monument stood for them, only the whisper of the river. A veteran who survived the explosion returned home to Ohio. He limped down familiar roads lined with spring trees in bloom. Neighbors greeted him with joy, unaware of what he had seen. At night he dreamed of fire, of voices calling through smoke. He tried to tell the story, but words failed him. Each time he began, the memories rose like waves and broke apart. People nodded kindly and changed the subject. They wanted peace, not the echo of another war. In Arkansas, a farmer found burned timber caught in his field. He used it to build a fence post, never knowing its origin. The wood still smelled faintly of smoke when the rain came. It stood there for years until the river washed it away again. The Sultana's name vanished from school books and speeches. No one marked the date with ceremony or songs. The Mississippi kept flowing, wide and indifferent, holding her story deep. Only a few families kept old letters and photographs in wooden boxes. The narrator slows further, his voice almost a whisper. He speaks of memory, fragile as paper left in the rain. When stories fade, it is not because they are small. It is because time itself forgets how to listen. Decades later, a handful of descendants gathered by the river. They carried flowers and lanterns, placing them gently on the water. The lights drifted away, small and trembling against the dark. For a moment, the river glowed again, as if remembering. Years turned into decades, and the story of the Sultana drifted downstream with time. The river changed its course slightly, covering the old wreck with layers of mud. Fishermen said that on calm days they could still see shadows below the surface, but few believed them, and fewer still remembered the name. In quiet towns along the Mississippi, only fragments of the story survived: a yellowed newspaper in a library, a family Bible with a soldier's name written in faded ink, a photograph of men smiling on a steamboat that no longer existed. The narrator softens, rich with reflection. He tells how memory, though fragile, always finds its way back to the light. Tragedy may sink beneath time, but love and loss rise again through stories, and those who listen become the keepers of what history forgets. In the late 20th century, a few descendants gathered at the river once more. They stood near the site of the explosion, where cornfields met the water. The current was slow, the wind gentle through the reeds. They placed flowers in the water and watched them drift away. Each blossom carried a name, a prayer, a whisper of remembrance. The petals floated together, forming a trail of color across the current. Some cried quietly, others simply stood and watched. The Mississippi moved on, carrying their grief toward the open sea. Today, a small monument stands in Marion, Arkansas. Few visitors come, but those who do linger longer than they expect. They read the carved names, running fingers over the cold stone. The silence there is deep, but not empty. The narrator slows to a peaceful rhythm. He speaks of how stories like the Sultana's are never truly lost. They live in the hearts of those who retell them, in words spoken aloud, in the soft murmur of rivers, in the patience of time itself. The Mississippi still flows past Memphis, wide and eternal. Its surface glows with sunrise, calm and indifferent as ever. Yet beneath that calm lies the echo of one April night, a night when courage, loss, and memory became part of the water itself. The Mississippi remembers, and through every ripple and every gleam of light, it whispers back their names. The story ends not with silence, but with remembrance. The river carries it on forever.